Hello, everyone. Welcome to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising Marketing Manager for HGA, and I get to be your host today. We have a sponsor today from Yarn Barn of Kansas, celebrating 50 years. Go to their website, yarnbarn-ks.com, and see how they are celebrating 50 years in business. They've got some wonderful activities going on. We will take questions today. We ask that you put those in the Q&A and not in the chat, but we love your comments in chat. Those are always great to see. But I can't find the questions if they're not in the chat. I mean, not in the questions. So thank you for doing that. Today, we have Joan Berner. Joan started working with her hands at a young age, primarily sewing, and she did some knitting. And then, like most fiber people, she got involved with other things, and she felt like mostly she was just doing sewing. And then her husband, God bless her husband, said, you need to take up weaving. And she began to realize that with weaving, it just opened up a whole new world for her in fiber. Then she retired and she left New York State and she came to Asheville, North Carolina. She said mainly for the inspiration and the great climate. She does a lot of felting, she weaves, she stitches shibori, she spins, she dyes. And now she's doing a lot of work of turning her cloth into clothing, into garments. Joan teaches at regional conferences, at John C. Campbell, at Convergence, and she currently teaches sewing for Handwovens at Haywood Community College, their professional crafts program in the fiber division. One of her biggest experiences, she said, was that she got first and third in Convergence 2018's fashion show in Reno. And Joan will be teaching at Convergence in this summer in 2022 in Knoxville, hopefully. So welcome, Joan. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be invited. I certainly appreciate Yarn Barn sponsoring this. This is really a very interesting way to get across to a lot of people.
It is. It is. It's a great way to stay in touch. Well, our first question is always the most important. What is your favorite tea?
I don't drink tea. My husband does, so I've been trying to drink tea that he likes, but I haven't found one yet.
Uh-oh. And in the South, it's kind of blasphemy not to drink tea.
At least sweet tea, if nothing else.
That's right. So would you tell us how you got started in fiber?
Yeah, as you summarized there, I did a lot of stuff as a child. I learned to sew on my mother's 1950 sewing machine, and I still use that today. And it works better than any of my other machines that I have. And then I tried all the normal things that, people end up doing. I knitted, and then I did quilting and went through the whole gamut. And when my husband finally decided I needed to learn to weave was when I got to weave. And then I could see there was a whole fiber side of this that I never knew about. And so since I spin and all the other things that the weaving opened up for me.
Well, you're an environmental engineer, right?
Yeah.
And we've been surprised at how many of our guests are artists, either are engineers or they're mathematicians, or they're in the sciences. So what do you think the relationship is between being an engineer and your passion for fibers? What's that connection for you?
Yeah, when you asked the question, I was like, I never thought about it that way. But I realize it's like a project planning thing when I'm going to make a garment. And so all the things that you learn when you're an engineer really do come into it. And, first of all, there's the obvious math that's involved, because I know for a lot of beginning weavers, the math part just scares them away. So there's the math part of it. But I approach things like it's a project. So it's almost like a project that an engineer would have to do. I have to determine my materials. Lots of times it's always asking the what if question as an engineer, can I substitute a material? Can I make it work cheaper? Can I change the configuration of the space? And so those types of things where I was always taught to question, what am I going to go forward? How do I decide? I find that I do all the time with my weaving or my felting. It's like, okay, what do I want it to look like? What am I going to use? What are the parameters? And so even with, like in weaving, when you're considering your set and what the warp and the weft crossing look like, there are all types of things that as an engineer, I would have gone through that process. And then, of course, documenting it when you're done, which as an engineer, I was never the best about. And I'm not the best about it now. I'm like, oh, I'll remember, but I never do. But, so it kind of follows the pattern of thinking that you develop as an engineer.
Yeah, I think that documenting, we all kind of nod our head at that one. That's a little tough. Now, your work is so varied. And I didn't know this until I started looking around a little bit, but you have a costume that you've made, and I believe it was for the theater, right?
Yep.
And then we have this beautiful piece that was in the Convergence 2014 fashion show, the calm before the storm. Would you talk about how your work is so different? It's just amazing. And I wonder how many people have never seen the one on the right.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, it's kind of surprising. Asheville Community Theater has what they call costume drama. And so they select a number of designers, they give them a category, or you get to pick a category of what you want your work to be from. So like this year's category was garage sale. So it meant that everything I did had to come from a good garage sale. And so to me, it's always a challenge, and it's about the process again. The process is no different using here duct tape and metal and screening than it is to use different kinds of fiber. And so I always get concerned that I'm getting too boxed in and I'm not thinking far enough afield. So I always enter this show every year to make me think, okay, I've got to start thinking out of the box more. Can I do this? And I always come to the point in the project like, this is going to look terrible. Why did I decide to do this? But again, it's that process of pushing forward, coming to the end and making it work. And I use the same design principles. In the costume, she has netting at the top, but then there's a little wired, I crocheted some wire, and then I did the belt has all these pieces together. And they're actually just a steamer that you would put in your pan to steam vegetables in. So it's like making me think of different things I can include in my, setting that process up in my head that makes me think differently than just the normal things that go together. So it's to me, it's the same thing. It's like, how can I make something that looks good when it's done? And I have to make myself think a little bit more about the parameters as I go into it. And she was an excellent model. She just played it to the hilt. So,
So the thing around her waist, that was a colander. Is that what you were saying?
the
Or the thing on her head?
The little pieces that come down from
Uh-huh.
the belt,
Uh-huh.
they're actually those little steamers that have all those little fins on them that you can steam vegetables in. So I took them apart, and then I put them back together to make them little pieces of the skirt.
That's great. That is so good. The other side of Joan Berner.
Yes.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about felting and weaving, because you've said on your website that felting is the opposite of weaving, that weaving is very precise and you got to make these decisions. And like you said earlier, there's the math, while felting is more intuitive. Would you talk a little bit more about that comparison of the two processes for you?
Yeah, I think some of it for me is like, I don't like all the upfront work. So all the work that goes to
Um,
setting up a process, you know, like weaving, I've got to decide how it's going to look. I'm going to do a number of warp and weft combinations to see how they look. I have to pre-shrink it and then start all over again, and I've got to set it. And so to me, and you know, if we skip a stitch or skip a thread, or we go ahead and we've misthreaded a piece, you see that immediately. Um, and so it's so precise even that you can put all the information in your computer and it spits out a picture that is somewhat almost exactly like what it's going to be. Whereas felting is much different for me. The process is easier. I know the shrinkage. Um, I don't have to worry about the warp and weft. I've used the 3 materials that go into it so many times. I know exactly what my shrinkage is going to be. I love that it's tactile, and you can create designs as big as you want or as small as you want, and you can change them as you go. You know, the piece on the left has different overlays of silk on it. And so some can be big, some can be small. It's where I think I need to draw attention. Whereas weaving is much more, you know, what you set out, that's what's going to be the whole length of your warp. So it really does make it easier for me, and it's more intuitive, I think, as you go along, because you can say, oh, I think I need a little piece of a different color right here, and I can put a little piece of a different color right there, whereas I can't when I'm weaving.
well, I was reading on your, again, on your website that, and I hadn't thought about it, and you were talking about how felting is sustainable. That you were saying that, well, with the dyes that you use vinegar and that it runs clear, and that you use materials that you find like at, I don't know, like Goodwill or, you know, thrift
Yep.
stores and that kind of thing. Is that true?
Yep. You know, when I started felting, I just used as my top layer, a layer of dyed silk. And it may have been dyed in different locations, and it may have been dyed differently in places, but it was pretty much plain silk. And then I got into dyeing some silk garments that you can buy that are torn in places, that the oriental garments, and they're not good for a lot of things because they're torn and they're so old. Well, with felting, it doesn't matter because the fibers are going to catch and mend the tears. And so there too, I'm being able to take something that has little value now, but I can use it again because you couldn't use it for much else. And so I think that that really helps. And then that got me into patterned layers on the top, which I had not worked with before. I'd only ever worked with pieces that were more similar to the 2 that you just looked at. And so then when I got dealing with patterns, the next time we went to the local thrift store, they actually had tons of scarves for sale, which were of a light enough weight and met the criteria that I could felt with it. And so for a lot of my scarves, I buy scarves from the thrift store and then I incorporate them into my felting. So I like being able to use something that's already been used, and then I give back a portion of what I make from the scarves that I use that with back to the store. So, you know, the wool is sustainable because you've got sheep, and sheep keep growing hair and you shear them once a year. And I use dyes, just as you said, that are totally taken up. My water's clear when I'm done, so I can reuse my water over and over and over. So I really like that about the process.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. In a time when that's so important, you know, you're
Yes.
kind of ahead of the game on that one. Well, one thing that and I teach a beginner class, and this is one of the things I found with beginner weavers is that trying to get them to understand that color in weaving, color in fiber does not act the same way as color in painting. And even within fiber, right? Like some knitting isn't the same as weaving, and
Yep.
crocheting isn't the same as knitting. So how do you find the biggest difference between your felting and weaving when it comes to color? And then do you use different colors for felting versus your weaving?
I actually dye a lot of my fibers. And
Uh-huh.
so I actually use the same colorways that I use for weaving and for actually looking at my felting processes. So I'm in the same color range, but they both act very differently. Um, the weaving, like I said, is really always hard for me to find that right weft that's going to cross that warp in a way that it enhances both of them. So many times I dull one out, they clash, that you don't get the effect of the weave structure because it's been taken over by the weft or the warp. And I find it harder to deal with that kind of color. And I think that is really a hard thing to do. I mean, I have put together a whole piece that was going to be a plaid, and I thought it was going to be really great. And there was this one color in it that was totally wrong with everything else I used. And I didn't see the value as being quite so different when I was actually putting it together. So I mean, I ended up replacing tons of threads because everything else worked, and I couldn't abide by the color because it wasn't the right color. But I do find weaving is really hard to get the color process to work. Whereas if I'm felting, if it doesn't look good, I just pull it off and away I go. So, you know, I just have a piece here. So you deal with the warp and the weft and the type of yarn when you're dealing with weaving. And with felting, there are three things that you deal with. You deal with a felt layer, it's like a little bat, and you deal with roving, and then you deal with the layer that goes on top. So any change in those three actually will make a difference, but I've used enough of them, I know exactly what kind of difference it's going to make. And so it's much easier with color, and all that color is right in front of me, and I can see the next piece as I go and the next piece as I go. So but it takes a little bit of work and a little bit of felting to understand how those little threads color the piece as they come up through the piece of silk. So it's very, very different. And I think it's a really hard thing for new weavers to learn. You must be brave to take on new weavers to try to deal with them, to give them an idea of how the color works. It is very tough, especially like the banner right behind you,
Right.
the color and weave piece there, you know, that's a lot of different things. And to get a new weaver to see that is really hard.
Well, I feel their pain because I feel like I'm the queen of mud. You know, I can find the right colors to put together to make mud. Nobody does that better than me. So we have that in common with the neuro.
You have some empathy with them. That's a
Big
good
time.
thing.
Big time. Now, you studied at Haywood Community College, which is near and dear to a lot of us here in the
Yes.
Southeast, especially. And you were a returning student. And I was wondering, how did you come up to the decision to go back to school, and why Haywood?
You know, I had been an engineer most of my time. I also have a teaching degree, so I was a teacher for a few years, but then I did get my engineering background, and I didn't have a lot of time to do the things that I wanted to do, even though I loved them very much. You know, I had a daughter growing up the whole time I was working, and so that always makes it hard dividing your time. About the only times that I used to get to weave when she was growing up, she would play weaving store. And she would put up little gates at the door. She'd let people in, and she'd make little signs on her computer that there was a sale going on. But I didn't have a lot of time to do that. And so I had this real vision that when I retired, I wanted to weave all the time, and I wanted to become like a full-time weaver. And we decided to move. My husband had this huge 80-foot long barn, 3 stories high, full of stuff. And I figured I'd never convince him to move, but he was as tired of the winters as I was. So we moved. We lived in one place where we got 3 feet of snow overnight, and we had 300 inches of snow the year before we left there. So we wanted to go someplace nice, and we came down here. So it was really easy to fit in, or to see that Asheville was a little different, that it really does have lots of stores that have people's work in it. And it's so nice seeing the work being shown and seeing what's around. And the Southern Highland Craft Guild here has a building, and it's up on the Parkway, and it's the Folk Arts Center. And its members can actually go ahead and sell stuff through there. And it really is a very nice store. And one year, Liz Spear was actually working at, or demonstrating, because we have demonstrators in the lobby during like 9 months of the year. And I had seen some of her work before. And so it was like so cool to see a weaver out in public and all these people surrounding her wanting to see what she was doing. And some little child said, "Oh, where did you learn to do this?" And I had read about Haywood just very briefly in their ads and had looked them up, but I didn't know a lot about it. And she just went on and on about how great Haywood was. And so on that trip, we took a trip over to the school, and the school is like out in the country, this beautiful setting. It has a little pond with a water wheel. And then we went to the weaving studio, and, you know, there were like, I don't know, probably 14 or 15 looms in there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can go to school and I can get credit for weaving all day. This is just great. And so we did move, and I waited a year to go ahead and take the program, because in-state tuition was cheaper than out-of-state tuition. And I had to be a person that lived there for a year first. And the tuition was all of $625 for the year. So it was no big deal. But, and Amy Patansu was just coming to the program then. And Amy is a person who teaches more by experimentation than rote. So instead of saying, you know, we're going to do overshot, go to the book and pick out an overshot pattern and weave, she's not like that at all. It's like she explains the basics and expects you to design one. And my husband laughed. He said one day, he said, you know, I have never seen you work so hard at a degree than you have at this 2-year degree. And it was true. She made us work, but it was a different development too. So it was really helpful for me to see it differently. And I learned a lot while I was there. So it wasn't even like going in, what am I going to do? I already know how to weave. It was a great experience. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
We were hoping that somehow we could incorporate that into Convergence, but it was just too far away. But yeah, if anybody is in that area, go check it out. It's just a unique school. It's a unique program.
Yeah, because they teach you the business side also. Yeah. And so, you know, they teach you how to do a marketing plan and how you can apply for grants. And so the marketing plan, if, you know, like I've changed so much from being a weaver to being a felter, it still applies. You know, I was taught basic, you know, skill building and different ways of doing things, but then I was also taught how to run the business too. So that was, it is a great program. I still work with them. I've been teaching the sewing class for 10 years now, and I have a lot of respect for the program. It's really great.
Well, you mentioned the marketing part of it. I wanted to ask you another question of, because you sell your work. I see you sell it on your website. And then like you mentioned a while ago, you're a member of the Southern Highlands Craft Guild, and I know you can sell through them too. And I'm always curious, how do those decisions get made in people's minds of, okay, I'm going to sell? Is it, oh my gosh, I've got all this, I might as well sell it? Or is it, I want my profession to be fiber making? Or how did you get from just doing what you love to selling it as a professional?
Yeah, and I'm still not sure about if that's the way I want to go. You know, part of it is personal, that I find that I am much better off if I have a deadline to do something. And even though I work right up to the very last minute of the deadline, I am much better organized. I get up and work. And being retired, you know, sometimes it's easier to sit around and do nothing. And so sometimes if I am concerned how something's going to work out, or I think it's going to be too difficult, I can avoid it a long time. But if I have a deadline, it really sets me up to do it right. So I did need something like that. And I decided that's what I was going to do for a profession. I'm still struggling with that a bit. And, you know, this last couple of years has completely thrown everything to the wind. The
Yeah.
way things were marketed and sold is no longer the way things are done. So I'm still working on maybe a different model.
That'll be interesting to hear more about that. Well, you since you were at Haywood as an older artist, what do you think you would have done if you had been there at 18 and 19 years old? How do you think your experience would have been different?
I'm not sure what I would have ended up doing. I probably would have, you know, saved myself many years of trying to learn things on my own. I don't know if I would have had the confidence at that age to go out and it be my business and having to make a living.
Yeah.
But I would have hoped that there were different things I would have done. I would have done clothing. I discounted a lot of my own skills, and I think a lot of fiber people do. They don't realize some of the skills they have in making fiber. Like I had sewn all my life, and I discounted sewing as just a throwaway. Everybody knows how to sew. You know, this is just nothing to focus on. Yeah, I know. Sometimes looking back, you're like, well, what was I thinking? But so I didn't, at that age, I didn't have some of the confidence to be able to go out and do things. I think I would have spent more time doing pattern making if I had better acknowledged some of the skills that I had, instead of, you know, looking for a pattern in a book. And now I do most of my work as pattern making. And so I wish I had done more of that there, developing an original pattern and knowing how to fit, knowing how to grade a pattern so that it would fit a number of people. So like all my projects turned into clothing anyways, but I think that if I was younger, I would have been more prone to trying to do some of those end product things than I did.
I just think that would give you such, for me, it would give me such a sense of accomplishment, because I mean, I'd be tickled pink just to take a pattern and make something with it.
Mm-hmm.
But then to be able to say, oh, I designed that, I made the pattern, and then I made the object. I just think that would give you such a sense of accomplishment. What a great way to approach your fiber.
Yeah, I have changed my teaching of my basic sewing class along those lines. I spend time teaching what looks good on the body and different design points, like, 3 buttons, it's always an odd number, and teach a number of those things. But our course is fairly short. It's only 8 weeks, and we have to weave the material as well as do the sewing part, and they do a lot of samples. But this year I decided to try that with them, to start them from the point of making their own pattern. And and they were a great class. I mean, by the time I get them from Amy, they're well on their way. They've experimented with so many things. They did a really good job with it. And it is what you just described. You know, I didn't see it that way because I was always a sewer, but they were just like so proud of themselves that, you know, I made this from scratch and look, it fits. And it was very successful. And I've taught it to a local cloth class recently too. And it is really quite a booster for people and how they feel about what they're doing, and that they're able to do more, and it gives them more skills that help set their work aside a bit. And they learn that they don't have to just design big boxy things, that they can design things that fit well and look nice on a number of people. So I've turned to more of that, and I get a lot of satisfaction when the students can be like, they're at that aha moment that it really does work and I look really good in this. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Well, you mentioned local cloth. I wanted to talk some about that too, is that you did a residency at local cloth. One, can you explain to folks who may not know what local cloth is? And then also, how did that change how you approached your work after doing that residency?
Local cloth has been at it for, I think, almost 10 years now, with the ultimate vision of trying to build a fiber shed. And so it is a conglomeration of people with any related fiber skill. And they've worked with, first it was just having meetings, then they did rent a studio space, and that's when they first started having resident artists. And so the first year of that program, we had to go ahead and say why we wanted to do it. And there were 4 of us, and we each got a day a week where the studio was ours. We could teach, we could work, or we could use the space any way we wanted. We didn't have a lot of space for storage, so it made it a little tougher, but there were lots of things that I learned during that time. One of the things was it really gave me more of a regular practice, that I needed to be there, and maybe it was only once a week, but I was always there on Thursday, and I came to work or I came to teach. And so that really helped me build more on my skills because I always needed to be there. And I taught a fair amount there. I learned a lot from the teaching. I got to teach a group of veterans that a local organization sponsored some kind of handwork program for a group of veterans. And so I ended up being able to do a felting class for them. And so I got to know a whole group of people with very different points of view. And of course, they were the most determined people in getting their felting right. You know, most people stop working on their felt too soon and it's not sturdy enough yet. Well, that group, there was not an unsturdy piece of felt in there. They were going to finish it no matter what. And then we got to plan a workshop for this group of women who worked for a company that makes yardage. But all of these women worked in different parts of the country, and most of them in different parts of North Carolina. And so they were getting together for their annual, let's plan what's going on next year, seeing each other. So it was like a conference for them, but they took some time out to actually do work. And so I did the dyeing portion. So I had them for a day to dye, and it just cracked me up that here were these people making these gorgeous fabrics and designing them in their mill who had no idea how fiber was dyed or anything else. So that was a really interesting experience. And I got to know a lot of people in the classes because I had a fairly large number of classes. So it was really good. I got to know people. I also got to hang 3 shows, or plan and hang 3 gallery shows, and worked on 2 fashion shows. So it showed me a lot of other things that I should be thinking about doing instead of just my daily participation. And it also helped me be more alert to the problem of dealing with volunteers all the time. That sometimes, you know, you've got to make backup plans, and so because it is a volunteer run organization. And just recently now they've moved into a beautiful space. It's over 3,000 square feet. It's got a really nice dye kitchen, and they actually now have an online shop, and they have a shop in the River Arts District. So they're working more and more. And it's always a challenge to try to bring the farmers together with producers. And they're making, so now we have once a month on Saturday is the Farmer's Day. So in the River Arts District, you know, you might have some sheep and things like that. So they're really working at it, and it's become a very nice facility to work in. So they have that fiber shed as its goal, and they're going to make it.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's amazing. Now that's in Asheville, right? Where you
That's
live?
correct.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, your work and you are pretty well known. I mean, between Convergence and your teaching, and most people know who you are, and they're very familiar with your beautiful clothing that you put in the fashion shows. But tell me something that people may not know about you as an artist or a person.
Actually, I am basically an introvert, even though I am
Really?
speak very loud. I'm shy. I'm insecure about my work. And I've heard other people, you know, say the same thing. I am getting much better at it, but I really have to work at it. It whenever I get ready to teach a class, that first 15 minutes is like, oh my God, have I brought everything? Are they going to like what I'm teaching them? Am I giving them enough information? And and you know, I know the stuff inside out. I have made hundreds of pieces of felt. It's not like I don't know how it goes together, but I still have that. And one of the biggest things for me for the longest time is that most of my felt garments are fairly untraditional. Most people, when they make garments in felt, they make a one-piece garment. And what it is they put a resist in the middle, like plastic that can't felt through. And so they make the front on one side of the plastic and then flip the whole piece over and make the back on another piece. And that is how the majority of felters do their garments. And of course, I'm not wired that way. I am like, get out the sewing machine and sew it.
Yeah.
You know, if it doesn't fit when they're done felting, you've got to do more felting to make it fit. And so, so I was, for the longest time, I felt my garments were like totally inferior to regular felters. And so it took me a while to get over that, but I finally have. And what it finally has gotten me to the point of is that I have to realize that I'm using my skills, and my sewing skills, since I've been doing them for so long, are excellent. And that if I'm using sewing to put this together, I am using the best skills that I have to do this, and I will get the best results because it's what I want. And it really clarified it to me, one of my students at the end of summer who was like, she was a phenomenal weaver, and you know, there wasn't an outfit she wore that didn't look wonderful on her. She had this great sense, and she says, okay, so I've done this, I know how to make things. She said, but I don't know what. She says, where do I go from here? What do I do now? And I always tell students, I want you to make a list of your strengths, because if you make a list of your strengths and start from there, that's going to help. I said, and the second thing you need to do is say, what do I like to do the most? And I always ask my students at the beginning of class, my college students, what weave structure did you like the most last year? So I get an idea of that. But I say, you know, what is it that you really like to do about what you've been taught? And so she told me, I said, well, then you do those things, and then you go find your clients from there. And it was like, well, Joan, what do you do? I have always done it the opposite. I am always like, okay, what will somebody buy? I'm going to go make something that somebody will buy, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to use my skills to the best ability and make what I want to make, because they're going to be the best of me if I do it that way, and then go find the people who are like that. So it's taken me a long time to get there.
Oh, I love that. That's great. That's a wonderful thing to get to your students to think about. That'd be a great thing to get your workshop people to think about.
Yes. Yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking, what would I say? You know,
Yeah.
so I love that. That's great. That's one of those where everybody in the audience, I bet's going, oh, I've not thought of that before. That's wonderful.
Here I am, retired many years, and it was this last summer I had the conversation.
That's great. You never know when you're going to learn stuff, do you?
Right. I believe that.
Well, what's next for you, Joan?
So I think I'm headed down a different path. I find that I'm most innovative and I have the most fun when I am trying to design something special. And I just did a piece for the Southern Highland Craft Guild. As a member, we get to be part of an exhibit every 2 years. And this year's theme was black and white. Well, I don't use black or white ever.
Little challenge here for you, right?
Yes. And it had to be only black or white, or it could be gray. And I was like, can I put like a little strip of red in or something? And it was like, no, it's got to be black and white. And so it took me a long time to figure it out. And I came out with one of the garments I've been happiest with that I've ever made. And I had to readjust my whole thinking when I got my pieces done, because a couple of the pieces that I dyed didn't come out quite right. And they were like, so I was short of fabric, and I had dyed 5 pieces of felt. I'm like, okay, I'm all set. And they were different colors. And then I had left some that I actually did hand stitch shibori on felt. Well, what I didn't do it exactly right. I made a 3-layer felt, and I should have made a 2-layer felt, and my shibori would have shown up better. And so initially I was really disappointed because the shibori didn't show up. Well, then I realized, a person buying this is probably not going to understand shibori in the least, that they're not going to think it didn't work right. But I got very odd patterns, and it took me a long time to change my perception from what I wanted to do to what I ultimately did. And it came out something that I was really pleased at. So it was like, okay, now I'm being reinforced because I took my chances and I took my time and I made it like I wanted. So I am seriously thinking about beginning to develop patterns. A lot of the current patterns out there for sewing and weaving are really boxy garments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a group of people they look great on. The students in my class can wear anything, and they can make this little boxy thing that looks like they're so cute. But so I want to get away from the boxy feeling of what things look like, not make them too complicated as a sewing project, but to be able to give people alternatives and see what you can really do. So I'd be focusing on making, a line of garments that look really nice, that I take my time on and make a project out of, and then look at selling the patterns and maybe felt. So I'm working on that right now. So it'll take a while, but I'm working on that.
I always love it when people hear it here first.
That's right, because nobody else has any idea. That's what
I love this. Well, I have to say, I've done shibori before, but I feel so stupid. I never thought about doing shibori on felt.
Oh, I didn't either. But this last year, I decided, I'm going to specialize in doing some shibori this year for my weaving. So I did woven shibori. I did some hand stitch shibori, but I was doing mainly woven shibori. And then when I had this vision of my black coat, I was going to have these long strips in the back that only covered part of it that were going to be shibori. And it was going to be, a white background and the darker colors for the shibori. And I thought, well, I should be able to shibori on felt. And it was just, I made it too thick. I made it heavy enough to be the coat fabric, but it was a little bit heavy, but it still came out really interesting. But I will do more of it too.
Now, is that piece going to be in an exhibit, or it already has been in an exhibit?
The exhibit just opened Saturday. So
Oh, really?
It's on exhibit now at the Folk Art Center in Asheville.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you're in the area, go check it out. Is it online also, or do you know?
I don't think the pictures were online yet. They have
Okay.
been trying to be a little better about photographing their exhibits since they lost so many people during the, the pandemic that didn't come in, that they've tried to make them more accessible. So I think that they probably will be online with them.
And tell me again where this is going to be so people will know.
It's at the Southern Highland Craft Guild Folk Art Center, and it's their main sales place and their main gallery
In Asheville.
And, it'll be on until like the first week in January.
Well, I hope I get to see it. I can't wait.
Yeah,
all right, we have bunches of questions. Should we answer some questions?
Sure.
All righty. I warned you about this. Everyone wants to know what's behind you.
Oh, I know. I almost sat in front of my sheep quilt today instead. It's a pineapple quilt, a pineapple pattern. I went through the quilting phase also. It is machine stitched and hand quilted, long time ago.
Okay, I know we have a lot of questions on how things are made, and I'm not going to go into that today. So some of you who've sent in questions about how do you make this and how you do that, I would encourage you to contact Joan through her website and maybe get some of those questions answered. Amelie Somerville wants to know what, and I do too, what are you wearing? What is that a jacket? And did you make it?
Yes, it is. You can see even my weaving is, I think of everything I do is for clothing. And so I didn't want a little design that wouldn't show up. I actually took an ECOT class
I was
from
asking if it's ECOT.
at Aramont a couple of years ago, even though saying I would never, ever do ECOT in my life. I also said that about spinning. I said that about so many things. So yes, it is just, and I had terrible problems with it, but yes, this was a different test pattern, and then this was the main pattern, and it's just
it's beautiful.
Fitting jacket. Thank you.
It's beautiful.
And I dyed with indigo. I'm not a natural dyer because I can't repeat my colors very well. So this was like, okay, let's try everything new and make it work.
Michelle Gaines, I'm not sure. I have to agree with her on her statement. She doesn't have a question. She says when she grows up, she wants to live in Asheville. And I have to agree with her. I love it. If you've never been to Asheville, North Carolina, put it on your bucket list. It's wonderful. Yeah. Me too, Michelle. Me too. Let's see. When Joan pre-shrinks her warp prior to weaving. I've not heard of this before. Is that what she meant? Did you say that?
I might have, but it's not what I meant. I did talk about the shrinkage after I've woven it. I always, make a sample, cut it off, see how much shrinkage I have, but I might have misspoken.
Oh, Kathy Roy. Hi, Kathy. Have you ever felted your handwoven fabric or used any handwoven fabric in a felting project? And she said, hi, Joan. Kathy's from North Carolina also. So that's
yeah. I don't think I ever have. Okay. I think it's a little, anyways, my handwoven is a little too heavy, I think, to go ahead and felt with it. I'm usually dealing with like 4 mummy silk, so it's pretty open and pretty lightweight. But no, I've not.
Oh, everybody's asking about the black and white coat. We don't have a picture of it, y'all. I'm so sorry. That's why I was asking about where it's going to be, so that we can go see it. Sorry, Patty. Patty Savignac wanted to know too. Now they want to see the sheep quilt.
Oh. What is
Michelle has another
bright
question.
red? It has
Huh?
some bright red pieces in it, and so I thought the red would be just too.
Oh, never for our
much.
group. It never too good. Michelle wants to know also, do you put embellishments in your felted projects like ribbon and glitter and things like that?
I used to do more of that. And I was fairly happy with the results, but now I'm more into a patterned silk on top. So it's too much to add those pieces to. I wouldn't be putting silk on the top likely if I was putting some kind of embellishment like that in it. So I don't do much of that anymore, but it's totally possible and it looks really nice and adds a lot of texture.
This is an interesting question. And I guess this is from Philanor Howard. And I guess she's thinking in terms of you being a teacher at a college. She said, teaching garment creation, do you see a difference in the way older people approach it compared to the way younger people approach it?
Yes, very definitely.
Okay.
Older people who have been taught how to sew are very, as I was too, are very regimented in the steps that they take and what they do, and aren't as likely to want to take a shortcut. Because they consider a shortcut wrong. And I've begun to take more and more shortcuts, as people might call it, because being a production maker, you can't do everything the way you were taught. And sometimes, especially with handwovens, hand felt is much easier to sew than a hand woven, because in hand woven, you're always worried about a clip is going to mean that it ravels out. You have to finish your edges of your seams. And so you've either got to have a good serger, or you've got to make like a mock Hong Kong finish to cover it up. So an older person is going to stick to all the letters of sewing, whereas most of the young people, you know, they sew by putting it in the sewing machine and away it goes. And they don't know how to put in a facing. They don't know all the things that we as older people have learned. And so, and sometimes it's really great because they see the basic components that need to be done and find an easier way for them of doing it. And, you know, we talk a lot about how it's got to look when it's done, but they can still find things that look very professional, but are done in a much different manner. So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's great. Good question. Good question. Richard Stewart wants to know, what resources do you recommend for those of us interested in learning to make our own patterns?
You know, pattern making is very basic once you understand it. And there's two ways to do it. You either start with a pattern that fits, and then you can begin to cut it apart, and you learn that you can spread it and that you can make darts where they need to be. You can change where the darts need to be. And so there's one with actually starting with paper and making changes. And then there is draping, which you get a mannequin of the size you want, or make a duct tape mannequin. And then you mark your straight of the grain so that you can keep all your grain lines perfect, so that it's going to hang right when you're done. And you can pin it to your mannequin, make it out of muslin, and then make that muslin actually your pattern. And there are good books for both of them. I'll put a list of good books on both sides for that, because there's a couple excellent draping books out there that show you how to make, you know, like if you're going to put a peplum on, how do you get that little wave in the peplum that makes it look right? And I'll put them on my website, but give me a couple days, but I'll put them up.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great. Now, this duct tape mannequin thing, do you teach that?
Yeah.
Well, you need to apply for Convergence 2024 because I want to see that. I think that would be brilliant.
Yeah, it's a really cool process, and it doesn't take much skill. And when you make it on the person, and when you're done,
it's your perfect body, right?
Yeah, And so even if you've got something, you know, that the basic pattern fits you pretty well, but you know, like maybe the dart's in the wrong place or anything, you can just put it on the mannequin and move the dart up where it belongs, and or move the dart down if it belongs lower. Oh, I had a woman who wanted to make a pattern out of something she had already made. So she used the pattern she had used before, and then she put it on her mannequin to save herself a little work. And and so we made changes to fit the duct tape mannequin, and she put it on. She goes, "Oh my God, this feels so much better. I can move my arms." So it was just the way you say, you know, you can just use it to go ahead and make something, because you can't do it to yourself. But it's a good economical way, because there are more other ways, but they're much more expensive. But it's a good economical way to get your shape and put things on it. I remember the
I'm
first time
amazed.
I did one like that, and I was like, "Oh my God, I don't look like that, do I?" I went and got a shirt out of my closet that fit really well, and I was like, "Oh, I guess I do, because it fits." So yeah, it's fun.
You have to do a warning before the class
Yeah,
starts. Warning.
all body types accepted. This is why you
I
weave
like that
or you
things
belt.
appear closer in the mirror thing. It's like
Yeah.
you may be shocked with your appearance. Wow. Well, you teach that. I'm signing up. I'd love to see
Okay.
that. All right. Um, Carol Davinsky said, you may have already answered this. Now you've talked some about it, is where do you find your inspiration for your fashions?
It's funny. I generally don't find an inspiration for a finished garment. I find inspiration in things I see. And especially if I'm on a trip somewhere, I want a picture of some form that makes me think, how can I put that in my clothing so I can see it? Like, I've taken pictures of tree trunks before because of the way all the pieces intertwine, and realizing I want to do that. So it's mainly just looking at things. And you know, I kind of equate it to sports players that, you know, are so good, they have to have it somewheres in their jeans. And I mean, I'll look at something and my girlfriend just laughs at me. I'll say, "Oh, that would be perfect in a garment. You could see where you could put this piece and it would go like this." And she looks at me, but I just see how it would look in a garment. And it's like, I look at magazines, I look at flowers, I look at things around. It's just taking something I see and saying, how could I make that into fabric?
I would love to hang with you and just hear that. That's great. Well, Joan, I don't know how it happened, but it's time to quit for the day. I can't believe it. This has been so much fun. Thank you for being here.
I've enjoyed it a lot.
You're an inspiration, and I admire that you went back to school. It makes me want to do it. And I look forward to seeing you in Knoxville.
Yes,
Fingers crossed.
I
And
can't wait.
see what you come up with for Convergence Fashion Show. I know you'll be there.
Yes, I am. I actually, I always do everything the last minute, but I have started it early.
All right, way to go. Thank you again. And also I want to send out a big thank you to Yarn Barn of Kansas. Go to their website and, like I said, see what they've got planned to celebrate their 50th year. As a matter of fact, if you go out now, they have the best of Yarn Barn. It's 25 patterns that they've offered over the last 50 years. You can see that and more at yarnbarn-ks.com. Beautiful, beautiful source of any kind of fiber that you might want. If you would like to support and be a sponsor for Textiles Tea, or your guild or your business, please go to our website, and information is on there to how you can sponsor an episode of Textiles Tea. Textiles Tea is also generously supported by the donations to the Fiber Trust. If you like to see more programming like this, and we have a bunch coming up this fall, please donate or join, or both, on our website at weavespindye.org. If you've missed part of this show today and you want to watch it again, or you want to share it with a friend, all of the episodes of Textiles Tea are recorded. You can watch them on Facebook, and we are also putting them on YouTube. I encourage you to go to YouTube and subscribe, and then that way you'll get a notice when a new one comes up. Next week, I'm so excited. We have Kira Dominguez Holtgren, who's going to be here and talk about her extraordinary and very interesting work. So thank you so much for joining me today. It was so much fun. I hope you have a great week and happy tea.